to what I call best practices. We'll cover all the critical roles of managing a plan from a fiduciary standpoint, and we're also going to talk about some of the risk reduction methods that are in place that can enable you to more effectively meet your goals and objectives in this vein. So with that said, we move to slide 2. Recently, I shouldn't say recently, over a year ago, the Department of Labor issued some new rules regarding fiduciary requirements and fiduciary standards. Those new rules are supposed to, or were supposed to, originally come into play effective April 10th of this year. There's been a delay. President Trump ordered the Department of Labor to take another look at the rules to make an assessment as to are they really feasible or not. So at this point in time, there was essentially a 60-day delay put on that initial effective date, which was originally, as I said before, going to be effective April 10th. So the new date for that is June 9th, if we count out 60 days. I'm not sure that much of anything, quite honestly, is going to change in terms of what those rules are all about, and quite a bit of the industry has already taken major steps in terms of putting them in a position to be able to comply with the rules. So with that said, what are these rules all about? So the DOL essentially is saying that financial professionals must act in the best interest of their clients. Can't have any conflicts of interest. All fees and commissions need to be clearly disclosed. But I think one of the biggest pieces of this whole thing is, financial advisors, financial professionals are actually going to have to go through much more of an effort in terms of figuring out, for example, if an IRA product is suitable or in the best interest of their client. In the past, a big part of the job there to look into a rollover situation for a client was to look at suitability of the investment, suitability of an IRA in general. But it didn't really entail looking at fees and expenses associated with moving the money to an IRA as a rollover, or potentially leaving that money in a qualified plan where fees and expenses to that participant might in fact be lower. So the big sea of change here is the DOL is really looking to impose fiduciary standards among a whole bunch of individuals or professionals that were never really treated in that same vein as somebody who might have been working with a qualified retirement plan. So again, that's a huge change for the industry. And again, a lot of investment houses, broker-dealers have been gearing up for this change over the last year or so. So I'm not quite sure where things are going to end up. I don't quite honestly anticipate a lot of change in terms of those final rules. The final rules are voluminous, quite honestly. I mean, it's an incredible amount of information to absorb. I know some providers in the industry are just kind of retreating from that marketplace, so to speak, as a solution. And I think that's some of the issue that the administration had with, just allowing the rule to kind of come into play here. Because part of the other side of this equation, it's obviously great to protect the interests of the clients, but if we have so many professionals who are withdrawing from the marketplace, the question is the average individual adequately served? So I won't get into much of a political or philosophical debate about that, other than to say, look, it is what it is. There's a rule out there. Implementation has been delayed, and major firms have geared up for many of the changes. So let's dig into today's topic in earnest here. What is a fiduciary? What's the role of a fiduciary? Well, number one is the top bullet here. A fiduciary has an absolute duty to act in the best interests of plan participants. That's really the key takeaway here. So, in many cases, senior officers of a plan sponsor and or their boards may actually have a fiduciary role in terms of managing the qualified retirement plan. And, part of the dilemma of the fiduciary, so to speak, is to make sure to take off the corporate hat and put on the fiduciary hat, and to understand truly job one is to take care of the participants. Now, that doesn't mean making decisions that are always in favor of the participant. It means doing things like administering the plan properly, making the proper interpretation from plan documents, taking appropriate action. So, there's this concept of discretionary authority or discretion in managing or administering the plan. One thing I always look to is, what does the plan document say? That's really the roadmap to how the plan should be managed. Again, and the basic roadmap is right in the plan document. It's also, obviously extends to the SPD, although quite honestly, the SPD is never detailed enough to truly understand how any plan operates. So again, there are a lot of functions that go into managing a plan properly and appropriately. So again, here's a little bit of a list of some of the things that go on administering the plan, and that could be anything from hiring a record keeper on a 401k. It could be hiring an enrolled actuary to do the actuarial work on a defined benefit plan. It could be hiring an administrative firm or a law firm even to create a plan document and to do draft plan amendments and update other plan documents like summary plan descriptions, right? It could be hiring an investment manager or an investment firm to take on that duty and that role. It could be retaining the services of a trustee of the plan. So, there's a laundry list of things that need to be done with any qualified plan, and it's really the fiduciary obligation of the individuals involved to take care of those things. So, coming along with the burden, so to speak, or the duties of being a plan fiduciary or liability. Again, the fiduciary has to act in the best interests of all plan participants. Has to kind of take off the corporate hat, and quite honestly, to the extent that there are any deficiencies or breaches, if you will, those fiduciaries could actually be personally liable in certain cases for some of those actions. So with that said, what I'd like to do is a polling question, which I'll tee up in just a second here. So the question is, has your company clearly defined fiduciary roles and responsibilities for your retirement program? So let me launch the survey, which I just did. So let's see if we can get some votes coming in on this, and I'll keep it open for a couple more seconds. And we'll tally the results, and we'll kind of peel them back and see where we stand on that. So it looks like most of the voting has concluded. Let me launch and share the results with everybody. So let's see, did that? I don't see that the results are. Yeah, I guess maybe, hopefully the results are popping up on your screen. They didn't really come up on my screen, but I can see kind of a summary here. So the answer is 79% of the group, has clearly defined the fiduciary roles within their organization. 14% of this group, somewhat, 7% no. So, the goal, or again, one of the takeaways today is to kind of figure out what are all the bits and pieces that we need to deal with, and where do we need to go, and what do we need to do to make sure we're doing the right thing in terms of managing our plans and our programs. So again, identification of fiduciaries is key. Some of those duties involve appointing various plan committees. So when I think about a plan committee for a retirement plan, a committee, for example, on a 401k or a defined contribution plan is probably going to be meeting, I'd say, upwards of 4 times a year, maybe more, maybe less in some cases. But part of the goal of that committee is to review the operations of the plan. And one of the most frequent items for review are plan investments and plan performance and the monitoring aspect of that part of the equation. So that's what I would typically see at least on a quarterly basis. Certainly on at least an annual basis, there's a review of the entire performance of the plan, meaning how did it work operationally? What's, in the 401k, what are the participation rates? What are the average savings rates? How many transactions have occurred? How many loans do we have? And how, basically, how does our plan stand up in terms of a plan of a similar size? And when I mean similar size, I mean asset size as well as participant size. And, also, how does that relate to other plans of a similar size within the industry that I'm involved with? So, if I'm a bank or if I'm, any other type of a corporation, I'd hopefully want to be looking at some of the industry stats to do a little bit of benchmarking in terms of how did things work for us for the past year. And obviously that leads to questions of, well, what do we need to do in the future to improve things? What, if anything, should we be doing? So again, the committee is important, selecting members, setting up procedures. One of the critical things of running any of these committee meetings is to have minutes to the meetings. There are numerous examples out there in terms of, I'll say, lawsuits, right, that have occurred, making allegations that a plan committee or a plan sponsor didn't do things properly, didn't, take the best course of action. So one of the critical things in terms of, and I hate to say it, but defending against that type of a lawsuit or that type of an allegation is to have minutes documenting essentially what was discussed and ultimately what the decisions were. So time after time in a lot of those court cases, the outcome is the committee doesn't always have to make the right decision. What they do have to do is document the course of actions that they took, and those minutes are going to be critical, in making sure that they've done their job, so to speak. So again, minutes of the meetings are crucial. Other things that need to go on at this level are, reviewing utilization of outside experts, right? So in the basic fiduciary premise here, right, we've got this idea that a fiduciary doesn't have to do all the heavy lifting and all the work themselves. One of the things they can do is hire professionals to help fulfill those duties. So again, professionals come in a whole variety of roles, anything from a law firm to an accounting firm who might be doing an audit on the plan, to the record keeper, to the investment manager. So again, there are a variety of roles, that can be retained, a variety of individuals that can be retained by the committee to do that heavy lifting on that part of the plan. So one thing, and actually I'm going to cover 2 or 3 things that are crucial from a plan sponsor standpoint in terms of managing a plan, and I'll focus this part of it on a 401k plan, because that's record keeping. Number one, you've got to get data to that firm, meaning who are the employees, who's eligible for the plan, so on and so forth. Have they terminated employment, whatever their current employee status is. Data is crucial to any record keeper on a defined contribution plan. Number 2, getting the money to the investment firm, providing the asset allocate, the asset side of the equation. So you got to get somebody the data, and you've got to get somebody else the money, so to speak, in order to invest it properly for the participants. So those are the 2 crucial things that need to go on. And again, they have to happen on a very, very timely basis. Some other things that go on in terms of getting fidelity bond coverage for the plan, and actually maybe even getting fiduciary liability insurance for current committee members and anybody else within your organization that may actually be a fiduciary of the plan. So again, understanding fiduciary responsibilities, but even as important, understanding who within your in your organization is acting in a fiduciary capacity is critical. So those are the 2 biggest takeaways we have so far. Okay, so we're going to move on to kind of breaking down the roles here, right? And so if I think about the role of the quote-unquote named fiduciary in a retirement plan, think of the named fiduciary as the CEO, somebody who heads up, quote-unquote, the organization or the job duties, if you will. All of the ultimate responsibilities actually end up flowing to the named fiduciary. So the named fiduciary is a principal fiduciary of the plan. They have to prudently monitor everything and document decisions, and that's kind of what I mentioned before in terms of any meetings or decisions or committee actions should all be documented through minutes to those meetings. As I mentioned before, named fiduciaries can delegate responsibilities, and again, this is outlined in ERISA, so it's nothing, there's no new concept here. This has been around for decades, the whole concept of hiring others to do some of the labor here. So that brings us up to our second polling question of the day. Does your company serve as the named fiduciary, or have you delegated the responsibility? So let's launch this survey polling question here. And if you can vote on that aspect, that'd be great. And we'll keep this open for a couple of seconds till we have a bunch of votes in. Then we'll, all right, so we're going to keep it open just a couple of more seconds here and tally the votes. All right, looks like we've got the lion's share of the voting done. So I'm going to close the poll, and we're going to share the results here. So this is pretty evenly split in terms of those, obviously, who have who serve as a named fiduciary under the plan, and those who don't, right, where they've delegated someone else. The big number here that is the third one, where there's about 25% of the respondents in this one are unsure. So, and again, this is part of what we're trying to tackle today, is to enable you to go back after this webinar and kind of take a look at the, certainly at the high level things that we're going to talk about today, and kind of figure out internally who's serving in that role. And again, if that role isn't being fulfilled internally, you know, who is it outsourced to? You know, and really at that point you need to figure out, well, if I've outsourced, and let's just say investment management to a financial advisor. So, and we're going to get into this next, you know, what role is that advisor playing? Are they a fiduciary of the plan, or are they acting in maybe a different capacity? So, all right, so we're going to get to that kind of stuff in a minute, but you should be able to go back and kind of figure that part of the equation out. So let's talk next about the role of the trustee of the plan, and I think of the trustee of the plan as kind of the plan's CFO. It's the person or entity who has the authority and discretion to manage and control assets within the plan, right? They're holding, quote unquote, holding plan assets. And again, this is a function that can be obviously outsourced, you know, to a professional. So that brings us to, I'm going to say, another subset of fiduciary roles here, the ERISA 338 investment fiduciary. I love it when we throw around paragraph sections of ERISA, right? But the 338 investment fiduciary, kind of like the CIO, the plan's chief investment officer. So a 338 investment fiduciary essentially assumes responsibility for all of the plan's investment decisions. So a 338 would typically be involved in selecting appropriate investments for the plan, selecting, you know, for example, asset classes to use within a 401k plan that'll typically be filled out using appropriate funds or collectives. So the 338 investment fiduciary is also going to be involved with monitoring investments. That's what we see most typically. They're going to monitor investments. They're going to undoubtedly be providing quarterly updates to the plan committee or the in-house fiduciaries, so to speak, for review. And ultimately, the 338 advisor is also going to be, you know, changing out plan investments, right? So again, what we typically see in this environment is there's an investment policy statement, the IPS as I call it, which is typically drafted in conjunction with the plan sponsor to kind of figure out, you know, given this employee population that we're looking to cover under our, and I keep talking about 401k in this texture, this concept, right? You know, given our population, you know, what are the most appropriate types of investments to have? Let's think about asset classes. Then let's think about funds within those asset classes. And again, let's think about that population in particular. You know, do we use target date funds? Do we use a managed account in lieu of target date funds to satisfy the needs of the population? So those are the types of things that go on at the planning stage, you know, that go into the investment policy statement. But then again, ongoing, the job of the 338 is to make sure that assets are being managed appropriately within that policy. And again, The same concept applies to plans other than 401k plans. Obviously, in a defined benefit plan, there's going to be an investment policy statement, that's going to be drafted to best meet the needs of not only the participants but also the employer in terms of how they want to manage assets, right? And we see DB investment policies kind of all over the map, and for a lot of good reasons. DB plans are either extremely well funded or very underfunded or somewhere in between. And again, depending upon the funded status of a DB plan, there are different strategies that might want to be, that the plan sponsor may want to utilize, that they might feel more comfortable with. So, for example, LDI, a liability-driven investment structure, can take a lot of interest rate volatility risk off the table. But again, that strategy may not be the best approach, for every type of plan. Again, depending upon the funded status of the plan, depending upon the wherewithal of the employer to be able to fund liabilities as they come due, minimum required contributions, that sort of thing. And then there's also an element of, expense management that comes into that side of the equation. So again, the investment policy statement really is drafted to be unique to not only the type of plan, but taking into consideration the participants within the plan, plus some of the goals and objectives of the plan sponsor. So again, 338 investment fiduciary is really the highest level of fiduciary status on the investment side of the equation, as far as I can, as far as I see here. So that brings us to the ERISA 321 investment fiduciary. So what is this, and why is it different from a 338? Well, the key difference here is a 321 investment fiduciary is going to recommend investments. They can actually help draft an investment policy statement. They can certainly help monitor investment performance. They can provide the plan sponsor with investment guidance. But here's the difference. They don't make the ultimate decision on which assets or which asset class or which funds, for that matter, stay in the plan. So there's an element of the plan sponsor retaining control over that final decision. So, if a fund, quote unquote, has been underperforming, or for whatever reason, if the 321 investment fiduciary says, well, we should, my recommendation is to remove that fund from the plan and replace it. Well, there's kind of a fiduciary decision that has to be made at the plan sponsor level to either agree or disagree, with that recommendation. So it comes down to, I think, a lot of the heavy lifting of a 338, but the client or the plan sponsor, retains the final authority, over that decision. Again, in our terminology, we call it, a directed individual or someone who has discretion, right? So if an advisor has discretion, they're more likely to be a 338, whereas if they need to be directed to make a change, again, that leads to more of a 321 investment fiduciary relationship. So again, a fine point here, but again, if the investment advisor or investment professional is saying, well, they're a fiduciary, your question should be, okay, which type of fiduciary are you serving, a 321 or a 338 capacity? So again, I think that's the crucial follow-up question on that side of it. So that leads us to yet another capture from ERISA, a 316 administrative fiduciary. So, a lot of folks think, well, I hired a record-keeping firm, or sometimes they're called TPAs or who knows what, right? But I hired a firm to kind of do the administrative work on my plan. So a lot of plan sponsors may say, well, I've outsourced this function. Well, actually, you haven't outsourced the administrative fiduciary duties. So the administrative fiduciary duties essentially mean administering the plan in accordance with the plan document, in accordance with law, and administering in the best interest of plan participants. So that comes down to a whole bunch of different things. It comes down to, let's say, appointing an investment advisor. It comes down to selecting a record-keeping firm. It comes down to maybe selecting a TPA to do the testing in 5500s and benefit calcs and that kind of stuff. It comes down to hiring an enrolled actuary. it comes down to hiring, a law firm or a TPA type firm or a record-keeping firm to do plan document work, right? So, there's a whole bunch of duties that fall into this category, and it's almost like anything that's in the plan document. And again, the plan document is the roadmap to administering the plan. Anything in there essentially falls under this 316 administrative fiduciary role. Up to and including, do I approve a hardship distribution, right? What's my loan policy for my participants in my 401k? How does a loan get approved? Truthfully, all of those duties fall under this category. So, again, don't be fooled into thinking that just because you hired a firm to do record keeping or to do the 5500s or to do, ADP and ACP testing, don't think that they're acting in a fiduciary capacity, because most firms in that regard are not acting in a fiduciary capacity. So, again, this is one of the critical things that's vital to understand this aspect, because, again, that's frequently confused. So kind of going back to one of the original premises here, identify everybody's role internally. Is the CEO of the organization a fiduciary? In a lot of cases, the answer is yes. Is my head of HR a fiduciary in the plan? Well, it depends on exactly what role that head of HR is playing here. Let's say you've got a retirement committee that sits down quarterly or semi-annually to review whatever it may be with the investment advisor. Well, are all of those members on the committee, a fiduciary with respect to the plan? In many cases, the answer is yes. And again, have you delegated any other bits and pieces out to anybody internally? Those are the kind of things you need to track down and make sure you're crystal clear on everybody's role. Because I got to be honest, if somebody didn't tell me that I was a fiduciary, how would I know that? How would I actually know what my duties are unless somebody made it crystal clear? Hey, you're a fiduciary in the plan, and you've got the job of making sure you're doing the right thing and ultimately acting in the best interest of plan participants. So that's kind of critical here. So, all right, we're going to get to polling question number 3 here in just a minute. So I just want to take a temperature of the group to say, which of the following make up the majority of plan lawsuits? Are they centered around investment advice, around investment fund lineups, around investment fund returns, or plan admin issues, administrative issues? So let's launch the next poll here. Let's see what people are thinking, and we'll get some votes here and see how this goes, and we'll kind of pull this apart in just a couple of minutes here, or just a couple of seconds actually. So we've got, let's see, not quite half of the group has voted on this one, and all right, so we're going to keep it open just a couple of more seconds here, and we're going to close it, and let's share the results. So basically, it looks like 32% of the folks on this call thought it was, I think it's investment advice, right, kind of driving lawsuits. 5% each for the fund lineup and fund returns, and 59% on plan admin or administrative issues. So interesting, right? Again, quite honestly, the big press headlines typically are around some of the investment fund aspects. Some of the airlines from years ago that had employer securities as part of their lineup, and they were sued by plan participants when the companies started to head towards bankruptcy. But by and large, it's kind of interesting. In most of those cases, they ended up prevailing because the committees actually made quote unquote reasonable decisions along the way, and they had documented what they had done. But long story short, let's just kind of jump to where we are here. So so really, again, only about a third of this group said investment advice was driving most of the lawsuits. Another 10% split it between fund lineup and fund returns. 59% of this group said it was more of the plan admin issues, and that group is actually correct here again, because the administrative aspect of running a qualified plan is a lot of things to do. We went through the punch list a minute or two ago, right? All those things we need to think about in terms of being an ERISA 316 administrative fiduciary. Top 5 list: failure to amend the plan, for tax law changes, incorrect definition of compensation in a 401k. That's probably the #1 issue for a 401k plan. Plan sponsors don't always know, believe it or not, the true definition of plan comp. Failure to include eligible employees or to exclude people who are not eligible, loan errors, impermissible in-service withdrawals. So again, that's just the top 5 list, and you can see some of the others on the list here. These are all things that need to be done, and these all have fiduciary repercussions, so to speak. So again, understanding what goes into the whole puzzle here, I think, is critical. So I mentioned earlier that, obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, but you can outsource a number of these functions, and there's also something called full fiduciary outsourcing. So again, basically what you're doing is hiring or appointing, but undoubtedly you're hiring somebody or a firm to kind of take on the various roles. And again, essentially all 3 roles that I mentioned, whether it's the 316 administrative duties, whether it's the 338 investment side of the equation, or even a 321 side of a kind of a relationship, all of those essentially can be outsourced, if you will. And some of them can be outsourced, if you will, on a fully bundled basis, meaning there's one provider that kind of steps into all of those roles, or kind of a split basis where maybe the there's one side of the equation is doing the record keeping and the core of the 316 duties, and there's an investment advisor in the mix, kind of picking up the workload on that side of the puzzle, and that can actually work very, very well. So what does outsourcing fiduciary responsibilities do? It minimizes risks to the organization. It relieves your internal folks, whether it's the retirement plan committee and or your board of directors, from these responsibilities. But again, part of what you need to do here is review and monitor the service providers that are out there doing the work for you. So just because you've hired somebody or outsourced it doesn't mean you're not responsible for, checking in to, number one, make sure they're the best organization or entity for you, to do that level of work for you. Also, looking at fees over time is an appropriate thing to do to kind of benchmark all sides of the equation. So, even though you're outsourcing, you can't outsource your duty to periodically review and monitor. So outsourcing saves time, saves money in most cases. It simplifies admin from your side, and it reduces risk on your side of the table. So really, what does that mean? Risk reduction is kind of key. Punching everything off on the checklist is super critical. Again, 316 is a very, very broad array of things that need to be done, on every single level. So this slide is not showing quite well. We'll go to the next one here. That basically will show you. You can outsource a lot of functions of the plan is the bottom line here. So I don't know if there are any questions. It looks like there's at least one question. Let me see. No, I can't really. This was just somebody who had trouble logging in. That looks like they're in already. So, the big question is, how feasible is it to truly outsource the fiduciary side of the equation? The answer is it's very feasible, but the one word of advice I would give you is to make sure that the organization or the entity that you're outsourcing to has experience in the role. What I see more and more often is firms out there who are saying, yeah, we'll assume certain fiduciary duties for you. And that, in a lot of cases, comes in 2 or 3 different flavors. One flavor is they'll act as what I call a co-fiduciary, which really, stands side by side with you in that fiduciary role, but doesn't necessarily rise above you in that role. There are fiduciaries who've been doing this stuff for a long time who kind of stand head and shoulders above you in that relationship. So to the extent that there's any issue or any concern or any legal action for that matter, quite honestly, they would stand above or in front of you as opposed to next to you. And again, I see a fair number of firms out there who have kind of jumped on the fiduciary bandwagon. These are firms that, over the years have done I'll call it the administration, but not truly assumed the administrative fiduciary role. So these are firms that, they've done a plan document, they've done testing and compliance in 5500s, and a lot of them kind of have stepped back and said, well, yeah, we're doing plan documents already, so we'll just say we're going to be a fiduciary in the plan document. How difficult can it be? Well, the real difference is, a fiduciary is always going to be thinking about the participant at the end of the day, and how are we doing the right thing for the participant every time we do something. And occasionally things don't go well and things need to be corrected. So a firm like that is going to kind of step up and say, well, we're always going to do the right thing in each and every case. So my only recommendation there is make sure you know who you're talking to, make sure you know what role they're playing. And again, the number one takeaway is, make sure you've identified all your folks internally and externally who are serving in a fiduciary role. So with that said, I don't see any more questions today, so we're going to kind of wrap things up. We're recording this, so if you wanted a copy of this at a later date, that's fine. We can and will, I guess we will send you a copy of the PowerPoint that we used this afternoon. And with that, I thank you for your participation, and feel free to call on us if you need help with any side of this. Have a great day, folks.